Overall, the film came together pretty quickly, with a majority of the time being spent both on editing the raw footage and sorting out the film's special effects, which all came from Canada thanks to an up-and-coming CGI artist called Ricky Chang. Up until now though, I've been pretty tight-lipped on the film's soundtrack and how it all came together, which is why I'd like to take a quick moment to talk a little about how the music for the film came about. From the get-go, we are treated to an insanely catchy tune, courtesy of Stoke rock band Lesbian Bed Death. These guys contributed greatly to the early films of GoreCartoons, and although you rarely hear them in our more recent productions, you can be sure that's only a temporary thing. My favourite track of theirs has got to be the film's opening, I Use My Powers for Evil. This song became the overall theme for Gangsters In Love towards the end of 2005 as editing was wrapping. Two other important musicians I'd like to mention are both Miles and Safe. Both lived in and around Middlesbrough at the time of composing, and although I never actually met either one during that time, both guys contributed greatly to the soundtrack like no composer has ever composed for GoreCartoons since. Safe composed the majority of the music heard in the film, a whopping 7 tracks. These range from soul to funk, from rock to mellow. He is the undisputed king of the Gangsters In Love soundtrack, even though the majority of his songs were used as background music only. Since Gangsters In Love, Safe has moved back to his native India, though we still remain good friends. He recently helped form a band called Groove Trap, and all I can say about them is, wow! They've just released their first album, and it's got Safe's trademark written all over it. I'd recommend a purchase to all watching, if only to help support what will hopefully become one of the independent bands of 2009. Another composer I'd like to mention is Miles, though I'm not sure what I can say about him that I haven't already on my website. Not only is he one of the most dedicated composers I've ever met, he's also a close friend. He didn't compose as many tracks for Gangsters In Love as Safe did, but that shouldn't suggest his talent is any less important. Miles composed Crushed Purple, the Sergio Stair theme heard towards the end of the film. The soundtrack up until this point represents a distant dream, a prelude to this, The End of Days. The song had been a Miles original for around 2 years, but on my request he spent 6 months tweaking it and re-recording it specially for the film. Like Safe, Miles also moved away soon after the film's release. He's in America now working with his new band Vignette. Very little experimental for my tastes, but overall a pretty decent bunch of guys. As with Groove Trap, they're definitely worth checking out. The rest of the soundtrack, although I don't really have time to get into any more detail than I already have, was also very important, and is one of the few factors concerning Gangsters In Love that has so far never been criticised. As for my own personal thoughts on the film, well, okay, before I go I'll give you a quick breakdown on my own views of the film as a whole. What I feel I got right the first time, what I'd do differently now, and what I think Gangsters In Love has achieved in the few years since its initial release. Gangsters In Love was premiered on the 25th of March 2006. The initial cinema viewing sold out at the box office, and just a month later the entire film was released online for worldwide audiences.
Hey Paul, what's your final thoughts then? Final thoughts, yeah, enjoyable, very well, nicely done, well edited, yeah, nice fun, great.
Feedback was mostly positive, though there were a few bad words said about it, most of which revolved around certain inconsistencies throughout the film. For that I'm not going to argue. Gangsters In Love was definitely flawed in certain areas, but what I set out to do I achieved 100 times over. As already stated, I made Gangsters In Love for me and me alone. Anyone else who was entertained the night of the premiere was a bonus, including the film's co-producer, Patrick Lau. At the time I tried to defend the little bad press we got, but looking back I agree with the majority of what was negatively said about the film. Here's a few bits and bobs I'd probably change if we were making the film now. Scene 17 got one of the best responses of the entire film, mostly because of Slippery Chicken's insanely funny dubbed dialogue. It didn't just cause laughter, however, it also caused a bit of confusion. The scene features Raymond Tan playing Sid, the one on the left with the afro, but in the previous scene we'd also seen Raymond playing Carlos, another afro-wielding character who dies on screen. Carlos and Sid were meant to be brothers in the film, but the dialogue didn't really reflect this in a sensible way, resulting in a lot of confusion that was never addressed. Someone once asked if scene 17 was some form of flashback. No, it was just bad decision making. Another thing that pissed me off was Patrick Lau's forever changing hair. God, that was a nightmare. Originally we dyed Patrick's hair bright orange for the character, but as time passed Patrick was unable to retain it. The reason Patrick didn't keep his orange hair for the duration of the shoot was because he was an arse. He couldn't be bothered. At the time I thought that he was a bastard for not doing so, and even now I still think he's a bastard. Bastard! Another thing I'd change is a major plot hole which seems to have been largely unnoticed by audiences. Featuring Bill and Will, both characters were brothers, one brought up in the jungles of Borneo and the other brought up in the mountains of China. Bill was made out to be the greatest killer the world ever seen, yet on film we see him kill no one. Will, on the other hand, was the world's greatest tracker, but do we see him track anything? Do we hell? He bumps into Frank by pure chance when Aiko and Frank drive past him. Also, Bill speaks with an American accent, while his brother Will speaks with an accent that sounds as if it's very much from Hartlepool, Teesside. I wonder why. Finally, the film's CGI. Looking back, I feel the special effects shots really stand out when compared to the on-location scenes. It's almost as if the film randomly jumps from one film to another, something I'd definitely do differently if I was shooting Gangsters In Love today. Which way it would go, however, is up for debate. Doing the movie all on location at that time would have been impossible, and my knowledge of green screens was too limited to pull off some of the bigger shots in the movie. Plot holes, bad CGI and odd casting aside, I feel the film was a major success. It shot GoreCartoons like a bullet into the minds of a local film industry, and although we are still as independent as ever, that's okay, because fame, money, was something I never wanted from filmmaking anyway. All I wanted to do was make a movie that I wanted to see, and when judged on that, there is no denying I achieved my end goal, no matter how bizarre it sounds. Since Project GiL, I've gone on to much bigger and better things, but even still I hold Gangsters In Love very close to my heart, and probably always will. It was my first film, my first time behind camera, and the first time working with actors. But anyway, it's time I wrap this thing up. Before I go though, I want to say a very special thanks to everyone involved in Gangsters In Love, not just the performers, but also the dedicated people behind the scenes, like the prop guys, the musicians, even the owners of the locations. Without you guys and girls, this film wouldn't exist, period. I'd also like to thank Patrick Lau one last time for everything he did during production and beyond. He no longer lives in Teesside, he's back in his native Hong Kong. But who knows, maybe someday soon we'll be able to work together again on a better film. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all next production.